The Amish foresaw the collapse of our society. Now, they were a little bit early, but they foresaw it and they positioned themselves to act accordingly. Now, there's been about 8 million supposed illegal migrants that have crossed the US border during the Biden administration. It's probably more like 10 million. Who knows how many it is? Obviously, they're not really doing much right, so who could say that they've counted properly, or there's just all these people just flooding across the US border. And I don't know if you guys have seen it. There's people riding up on trains from other South American countries. There's people coming in some of the other areas too, not just the Mexican border. They're coming in through the Keys, the Florida Keys. They're coming in through Puerto Rico, various different ways that they're getting in. And at the end of the day, this is going to blow our backs out. It's already blowing the backs out of some of these cities. And it's one thing when somebody with resources goes to a country, but even if you had, like, let's say $10,000, you wouldn't obviously indefinitely last in a place like the United States. And I recently went through the visa process for Australia, and for the visa that I needed, because it's going to be there longer than 3 months, it was basically 190 Australian dollars, which comes out to about 120 US dollars. And you're not necessarily guaranteed to actually get the visa. That's just the application process. Now, they better give me the visa, but it hasn't happened yet. And I thought it was going to be kind of an immediate thing. And it just kind of blows my mind that crossing the Canadian border, because I did that this summer, and it was like, they stopped me. I had to go through customs. I had to park the car. I had to go in. They were looking at my passport, going through the thing, and it took longer than I kind of thought. Like, it took like 45 minutes, because I wasn't just going to be there for a couple of days. And they were like grilling me on questions. They're like, well, how are you going to support yourself while you're here? All this kind of stuff. They don't want some broke as a joke type dude or something, like, coming in their country and just staying there. Same thing with Australia. It's like, well, okay, for this particular visa, it's like, you better have like the ability to support yourself to some capacity. They don't want somebody broke there that they have to take care of. And I'm not going to bat for like the Canadian or the Australian government or whatever. They've done a lot of weird stuff, obviously, through this whole like scamdemic deal. But as far as the visa process, they're not necessarily just letting like people with zero resources in. So this is unprecedented times. I mean, you think, let's say 8 million or 10 million, but let's just go by, like, let's say it's 10 million. Let's just pretend it was equivalent of 100 US dollars. If all those people had to apply for even just a visa like that to be here, that equates to $1 billion. $1 billion of revenue just from the application process alone. And then you just think, like, well, all these people are spilling across with just basically the shirt on their back. And then it's like they need housed, or they're just sitting around in these cities and stuff. And some of these cities, like the New York mayor, he's been complaining about it. And oh, this isn't sustainable, we can't do this. They honestly should bus all those people up from Texas, Arizona, all those people. They should be putting them on whatever buses, planes, and take them to Washington DC. Take them to Washington DC and just fill up the streets with all these illegal migrants. Just so it's a little more front and center, because I don't think a lot of it's being covered, and I don't think we've totally seen, obviously, the ramifications of it, because it would take 20 or 30 years for those people to be like a net positive when you come in and with that amount of flood. So you're talking a significant percentage of the US population. Now, supposedly Canada, their whole plan, because there's less than 50 million people in Canada. It's something like 38 million. And their whole plan is to supposedly, by 2050, get up to like 150 million or something of immigrants coming in. But this is like, just because of real estate investment, and it's tough to build, they don't really have enough housing. And this has caused their housing prices to shoot through the roof, or at least one of the reasons that their housing prices have shot up. And it's probably a reason ours has also shot up, because it's not that easy to develop land or to build stuff, because you have to get permits, and it becomes harder and harder and harder. A lot of these places, it used to be like $10,000 to put in a septic system. And then now it's like, you might have to spend 35 or 40,000 or whatever to put in a septic system that's that's approved, that's these certain types and stuff. It's weird. So being said, it's you know, more regulations, but the Amish were ahead of the game because, you know, they try to avoid a lot of this unnatural stuff. They try to be self-sufficient and rely upon themselves, and they foresaw kind of the quote-unquote the evils of social media and what that's kind of done to, I guess, people's perception and the family unit and all this kind of stuff. They foresaw this, and it maybe seems backwards kind of from our perspective, that it's like, well, that's just really restrictive, but there were reasons behind this, and that they saw this as, you know, a potential problem as time went forward, that a lot of this stuff would kind of like, their community would be torn apart, or their way of life would be torn apart, and it would be compromised. And you know, they've got their own issues in their communities. It's not without fault kind of thing, but it is a very curious thing. They live in the same world, but in a different world in a lot of respects. And actually, that was one of the things that I was surprised about when I went to Ontario. There were a lot of Amish up there, and stands a reason. I mean, there's a lot of Amish in Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Pennsylvania, those kind of places. So, you know, naturally, you know, you'd assume that some of them would end up in Canada as well. Very similar type place, agriculturally, you know, as far as what you can grow, a lot of corn, a lot of soybeans. But really, they kind of foresaw it. And the more I think about it, to be honest, the Matrix movies were a documentary. And one of the big things in the first Matrix movie that they said was 1999 was the height of our civilization. And it's kind of funny looking back on that over 20 years later. And they also, one of the, you know, themes was that this has all happened before. And, you know, you kind of look throughout history, and there's been these different empires that have fallen. Why did the Aztecs fall? Why did the Mayans fall? Why did the Roman Empire fall? All these kind of things. What happened to them? What caused it to unravel? And I kind of see a lot of this in our society and stuff. And it's not going to happen per se overnight. I mean, I think it's going to, you know, when does it become like some kind of very dystopian or post-apocalyptic type future? And if somebody fast forward from a certain era to here, they would think that it already is that. You know, but your experience obviously is radically different depending on where you're at. If you're living in the country, if you're way out away from the cities, or if you're in the cities. I mean, the cities have just really kind of gone downhill. I mean, the amount of, like, you know, murders and stuff in places like Indianapolis and Chicago, I mean, it's just absurd. So it's just lawless. My friend sent me a thing from Tucson just the other day. Some little 12-year-old Thuglet had like gotten a gunfight with like a couple dudes or something at a gas station. And you know, you just think like, you know, he's 12, he's like, you know, he'd be in sixth grade or something. He's just a little Thuglet already. You know, we've seen some of these recent things. You know, it's just, you know, you can obviously go on countless things, and people could sit there and point and say, well, some of these crazy murders or this or that happened 20 years ago or 30 years ago. And that may be true, but just kind of the volume of this kind of thing, and a lot of the other stuff that's sort of afflicting society today, and just, you know, I just don't think people realize kind of like how bad it's going to get. And it's sort of like already upon us. They're saying that around 20% of Gen Z like identifies as like LGBTQ, Disney Plus, whatever. And that's shocking. It's just very shocking that it's just like kind of like what, you know, what has sort of changed and how different that is than it would have been 30, 40 years ago, kind of thing. So the world's changing rapidly within the last 3 or 4 years. And I think at the end of the day, as far as like trying to position yourself, and as time goes on, you know, and I'm not the only one thinking this, but I think as time goes on, it just makes almost more and more sense to get away from these big cities, leave the big cities, and be self-sustainable. Not that you go full-blown Amish per se, but that you are self-sustainable, and you're able to grow your own food and produce your own electricity potentially be able to have an off-grid life, have fresh water sources, because our food and our water is contaminated. And there's no way that anybody can, you know, sit there and make some case that it's not. This stuff is garbage. This is not food. And it's just like these movies, Idiocracy. I mean, Idiocracy was a documentary. So, you know, it's just, you know, it's just really kind of crazy to the point that things have gotten. And it's gotten to the point where if the government says, like, you know, something's okay, you assume that it's not okay. You know, I mean, that's how much distrust people have in what's being said, in the narrative and everything at this point in time. So, but then you're screwed. See, here's the thing. You go out kind of in the middle of nowhere, and it's like, you know, even if you went to some small town, whether it have 5,000 people or 10,000 or 15,000 people, just people's interpersonal connections are so misconstrued because of social media that you're very, very, very unlikely to sort of have what would have naturally been provided to you just kind of inherently, for not just being a complete screw up, you know, 40, 50 years ago, or especially further back, 80 years ago. So what are you going to do? You're going to move to some like some super small town. You're going to be kind of this homesteader guy, and you're going to suddenly you're going to find a wife. You know, and one guy that I know, this is kind of funny because people that, let's say, like, they're not religious, and I've been saying this for years, that the religion thing oftentimes is part of guys' game. That's part of their game to get girls. Because everything we do in this world is for women. People argue, oh, no, that's not true. I'm perfectly fine. It'll be like this guy, like, commenting on some red pill video or something. He'll be like, no, I'm perfectly fine. I haven't dated in 30 years. I'm happy. I'm perfectly happy. Why are you commenting on a red pill video then? Why are you sitting here watching this? If you're so content and so happy about it. So at the end of the day, like, the whole religion thing becomes part of their game. And one guy, actually, he used to be on Steam It, if you guys remember Yala Poppy. And I ran into him in Thailand, which was crazy. I knew he was in Thailand, but I didn't think he'd be at the same beach. Like, it was kind of this thing. So anyway, we went to this pool party. But one of the things that he recently said, because we're still in communication through Instagram, and you know, he said, well, if you want a traditional girl, you gotta pick a religion and start practicing. I thought that was kind of funny because he's actually full of, like, a lot of good wisdom. And that is kind of funny he said that and everything, because at the end of the day, it's like kind of hard to force feed yourself some religion. You're like, that's not logical. That doesn't make any sense. But it's almost, I think a lot of the guys that maybe have succumbed to that situation, or it becomes part of their game, that, again, they live in two worlds. You know, maybe they're not, you know, whatever, they're not really kind of living this, like, super Christian life or whatever, but then they're wearing a necklace with a cross on it, or they got tattoos with the prayer hands, you know, this kind of thing. It's part of their game. And but that was kind of funny that he said that. And I would say that in the kind of, like, in these kind of Midwest areas, or obviously if you're in the Bible Belt, being in this kind of situation where you're not really kind of buying into these religions and stuff, it kind of, in some respects, it does kind of cock block you from maybe the type of life that you would ultimately want to live. But then it's just like, at what point has that ship sailed, kind of thing. It is kind of funny because, and that's a whole nother conversation, guys, in itself, just about how low the birth rates are going to get, and how far off, and how, like, sort of unhappy women are, and unhappy men are, and how there's, like, no motivation for them. You know, I'm going for the jet and everything, but shit, you know, it's like, there's only so much motivation you can have, like, kind of on a daily basis. And I think I've seen, like, some of these guys, like, really kind of kick into action. Obviously, like, once they have kids, everything changes. That being said, it's, you know, it is kind of one of those things that you do see, at least in the Amish community, for the most part, the family unit is intact. But one thing I have noticed at some of these Amish stores, sometimes we go to these Amish stores, they sell certain things. You feel like you're going to get a good deal. and some quality product and stuff like that. But some of these young women, like that, they're single. And I don't think you would have seen that 20 years ago or 30 years ago. So I think even within the Amish community, because what happens, they go to Rumspringa, where when they're 16, they can have cars, they can have phones, they can have all that, they can watch TV. And I honestly think it bleeds into their society too. So they're not totally immune to it. They live in what they call the English world. You know, they call us the English. And, you know, so it does affect them too. It does bleed into their society as well at the end of the day. So, and also that's another thing for the passport bros kind of mindset, that you're going to go to Eastern Europe or you're going to go to these other places. They have Instagram. So you might have like a longer runway, but you're not going to go there and it's not going to be like easy peasy kind of thing. So at the end of the day, guys, I really feel more and more like we're swirling the drain, and there's going to be tough times ahead and everything, but I think this is going to be like this. It's going to be 10, 20 years. It's like, how do you stay ahead of it? How do you extract yourself from that reality? And it's going to take some major moves. You know, like in the past, maybe if someone moved to the next county over, you might have to move like 5 states away. You might have to move to a different country to really kind of extract any type of value. And, you know, it's kind of interesting. All these people that came over to Europe in the past, and then now it seems like almost like, well, maybe there's an opportunity to go back to Europe and there's more value in a place like Spain or Italy that you can derive from a situation over there. So I don't know, guys. What do you guys think about that? If you're not from the United States, have you guys ever seen anything like this? I mean, let's say like 8 to 10 million people just flooding into the United States. They really have no resource. It's expensive to live here. How are you going to survive even for like a few weeks or a few months or a year or something? I mean, it's just a little bit unconceivable. And like, I wouldn't think of going to Canada with like no money in my pocket, or go to Australia with no money in my pocket. Like, you just wouldn't survive. I mean, of course you could sit there and try to live off the land or something, but these people coming over here are not living off the land. So anyway, guys, what are your thoughts on that? A little bit different video today. So follow me on all social media at Brian Phobos, YouTube, Instagram, Steam it, Twitter, Hive, DTube, Blurt, everywhere.